Hey there, welcome to XR Industry Leaders with ArborXR. My name is Brad Scoggin, and I am the CEO and one of three co-founders of ArborXR. And we've had the opportunity of working with thousands of companies since 2016. And we've learned a ton about what it takes for XR to be successful in your organization.
And I'm Will Stackable, co-founder and CMO. This podcast is all about interviewing the leaders who are on the ground making XR happen today. True pioneers in the space, from Amazon, Walmart, and UPS to Coke, Pfizer, and beyond, to uncover the pitfalls, lessons learned, and secrets that you can use to help grow XR in your organization.
All right. Well, today we are going to take a bit of a deep dive into VR and education, and we get to sit down with the founder and CEO of VictoryXR, Steve Grubbs. Steve, it's great to have you on the show today.
Well, I'm excited because this show and the Joe Rogan show, those are my podcast life goals, and one of two down.
Well, glad we could play a role in your, checking off a bucket list there.
Yes.
So, Steve, we always love to start with a little bit of the origin story. And, obviously today you're doing a lot of really cool stuff. You're partnered with several of the major hardware companies to bring education, bring VR education to universities and high schools and K through 12. But you have a really interesting background. You started several companies. You've been involved in politics. So maybe just give us a little bit of your background and kind of what in that mix of business and politics led you into VR and education.
Yeah. So my father was a middle school, public school teacher. And here's a story I've never told before. In eighth grade, I helped him in shop class. I helped him build a little buzz box. So two students wouldn't come up. They'd ask a question. Whoever knew it first would buzz, and that person would answer. And if they got it right, they got a little mini candy bar. So that was sort of my first time innovating in education. I actually had my father as a teacher, and so that was pretty cool getting to use something that I had built with him. So I've always had an interest in education. When I was young, 24, I ran for the Iowa legislature. Surprised a lot of people and won.
Wow.
2 years later, I was named chair of the House Education Committee and went to work trying to resolve issues in learning in Iowa. And there are a lot of them, just like everywhere else. But sort of the high water mark for me was the passage of a bill that I wrote, which was the technology funding bill, provided funding to every school in the state to connect to the internet, but build computer labs, that type of thing. Having said that, it still didn't achieve the ultimate goal, which was to really create a love of learning in students. And so that's where this conversation ultimately comes to.
I love that. Tell me, what's the motivation for you? Why the desire to create a love of learning in students?
Well, I don't know why, because I was a policymaker for a number of years, but I've just always had this thing that overwhelms me of how do we solve these problems in society. And fundamentally, one of very few things that really makes a big difference is education, learning. If students succeed in school, then it's going to solve a lot of problems with crime and employment and just good critical decision making at a national level. So that's very important to me. I was a high school debate coach, and so these are things that I've invested time in. And I think what we have built at VictoryXR really creates a love of learning, whether you're talking about history or literature or science. It's all happening.
Yeah, so many of your, especially the 360 tours, I could just tell there's a real passion for the history there. And man, you've had the privilege of traveling a lot as part of that. I'm sure that's been fun.
Yeah, telling some of those stories that people don't even know about. For example, in June, we told the story of William Wilberforce. Very few people know the story of William Wilberforce, but really in the abolition of slavery globally, there is no single person on the planet that contributed more to that than William Wilberforce. So his story of persistence was worth telling. So we went to London and told that story. And we've done the same thing with D-Day, the Velvet Revolution in Prague, which most students have forgotten about, the kings of Egypt and the queens of Egypt. So it's really something that I enjoy doing, and I also know students enjoy it.
Yeah. That's very, very cool. Well, tell us. So, you've got this political background that was kind of focused on education, and then you started several companies, and then 2016 you jump into VR. At least that's what I understand. I mean, what was that transition like? And I mean, VictoryXR has been around as long as almost any company in VR that has survived. You've seen a lot. Like, tell us kind of about the origin of that, and then maybe bring us up to speed with what you're doing and what you're focusing on specifically today.
Yeah, one of the advantages that I had was that I had started other companies and had to bootstrap them. How do you make payroll when there's not enough money coming in? How do you make rent? All of those things. And being an entrepreneur, there's certain key learnings that I had developed over the years of starting other companies, and I was able to bring those to the fore in this instance. So obviously 2016 comes around, we think that virtual reality is going to bust out of the gates in a big way, and it busts out of the gates in a slow way. It was more of a turtle race than a rabbit race. So fine. Part of succeeding is A, showing up, and B, lasting.
Mhm.
And a lot of people bailed out over the last 7 years, but
Mhm.
I think our persistence has paid off, and we are positioned now to we're a global leader, and we're positioned now to enjoy the uplift in interest of it globally.
Well, maybe just as we transition into talking, specifically about some of your initiatives today, I mean, give us your elevator pitch on what is VictoryXR today. What's the focus? What are you doing?
Yeah, so we're the leader in providing multiplayer synchronous learning for science, history, literature, and some math. And
Hmm.
what that means is that teachers can come into the space, they can teach a live class. For online students, this is the place where hands on learning intersects with online learning, which is really important. So that's what we've developed. We've got our own platforms, we have our own content, and so it's self-contained. And that's pretty long for an elevator pitch, but
There's a long ride.
that's what we've been able to deliver, and it can be asynchronous, single user, single student as well. But teachers have the ability to choose which path they want.
I love that. Actually, the first part of that elevator pitch, I was thinking, I don't know if I could do it that succinctly with Harbor. Can you give us a use case or a story that kind of illustrates everything you're doing in a nutshell?
I had there is a lady in Kansas City who runs a program for urban schools, and she called me one day and she said, "Could I use the forklift driving experience for my grandson? He's not a student. The license wasn't written for this, but he's sort of struggling right now, and if I could do that, that would be great." So she gave him a pep talk. She gave him a headset. She gave him a license to the forklift driving experience. He had fun doing it. He learned everything he needed to do to pass his forklift certification, and then he passed it and got a job driving a forklift. And suddenly his life was completely different. And if you think about that, where do you get to go to drive a forklift to learn? You have to be hired first, and then they're going to let you use the forklift.
Hmm.
This is the radical transformation. This
Hmm.
is the thing that delivers equality in facilities and opportunity, is giving students access to things like welding or forklifts or robotics or drones, or in the example of some of our schools, chemistry labs and biology labs, giving them access to this in a dramatically affordable way
Hmm.
changes everything. And so that one isolated incident is just one of hundreds or thousands of students who have learned skills or knowledge that they would not have otherwise had access to.
Yeah, that's so good. We talk a lot about since we started doing this show, we get to sit down with a lot of cool people doing cool things in VR. And I say it often, but it really feels to me that VR is enabling a learning revolution. And I mean, we're seeing, I think some stats say people learn 4 times faster. And it's the frontline worker at Walmart or it's the doctor. People retain 16 times more information. But one thing you just hit on, which I think is so important, we actually don't mention it that much, is just the accessibility of education, of the best training, and getting it ahead of time. You know, we've talked to some groups that do nurse training, and they said the exact same thing. I mean, you get to practice before you even start, which I think is just so powerful. And that's a great. I love to hear the story of the one. Well, also though, very curious and I mean, just your overall reach today. What you could talk. I mean, you're focusing on, is it K-12 and universities? Is it primarily high schools and universities? Like, what does that look like?
Yeah, so early on, we were mostly K-12.
Okay.
And then in 2019, we built our first higher ed lab. And then in 2020, Morehouse College came on board. They were our first university because students were tired of learning in Zoom. So we built them a Metaversity campus, a digital twin of their actual campus. And the students came on from wherever they were at, home, a library, whatever. And they joined their professor and other students on the Morehouse College campus, the digital twin version. And then they went to class and took chemistry and history and other courses. So before I talk about how many schools we're in, I just want to stop and talk real quickly about the Morehouse College study. So Professor Ovell Hamilton teaches world history. He's a retired United States Navy officer. And he taught the exact same world history course in a brick and mortar classroom through an online platform like Zoom, and then on the VR Metaversity campus. At the end of those classes, they looked for 3 points of data. Number one, what was the student satisfaction level? How much did they appreciate it and like it? Second, what were the grades that students got in each of those ways that it was delivered? And then third, how was class attendance? How was engagement? On all 3 of those measures, the Metaversity class was head and shoulders above the other 2. And why wouldn't you? If you're teaching world history and you can hop into a time machine,
yeah,
pretty cool. So students remember more, et cetera, et cetera. So that was our very first school. A year later, we had 2 schools. Today, we have 107 colleges or universities around the world.
Wow.
And we expect that to be in the range of 150 by the end of the year. And then by the end of 2024, we expect that to be closer to 400. So, we're seeing accelerating adoption, and our products are getting better. So it seems great. And that's about 10,000 students that have learned from 90 different courses that were taught in the 22-23 academic year.
That's awesome.
Can you give me just like a window into, I'm a student at Morehouse College or any of these universities that you're working with. Day one, do I get shipped a headset? I put it on and I'm in. Give me like 30 seconds on what's the experience for the end user.
Yeah. So if you think about University of Maryland Global Campus, if you're a residential campus, you might have a group of headsets. Students walk in, grab their headset, and they've got it for the course, for the semester, whatever the case might be. But if you're UMGC, your students are all over the United States. So we've worked with them to put together a program where we, ship out the headsets, they come back in, and but the nice thing is, just to date myself, I was the very first student on my dorm floor at the University of Iowa that had a personal computer. The only student.
Wow.
Yeah, my future wife would come by and type her papers. So it was a pretty good employee. Yes. I've seen how this adoption works. All the rest of the students had to walk from our dorm to the computer center to get access to computers. People see somebody has a personal computer, they want one, they're not that expensive, etc. So about a little less than 10% of incoming freshmen have a VR headset, and that number is growing. And so as this rolls out as a way to learn, students will stop walking to the lab and they'll just pull their headset on from their dorm room or their apartment or wherever they might be. And if you are at one of the big online universities like Purdue Global, UMGC, Western Governors, Southern New Hampshire, etc., I think that what we're going to start seeing very soon are courses that are, here's a course that's online, here's a course that's VR. If you have a VR headset or you're willing to acquire one, sign up for it.
Interesting.
And I think that when, UMGC has 60,000 students, Western Governors has 130,000 students, that largely resolves the hardware issue because those students who have them, so let's say it's 10% of students for easy math, and you're Western Governors with 130,000 students. That means that 13,000 of your students have headsets already. So why not offer them some courses on a Metaversity campus? It just makes sense, and it makes your school or university more attractive.
Yeah, that's very cool. So one question I always have, we've been around almost as long, probably about the same amount of time as your company. And early days, we did some pushes into education, and one of the biggest challenges for us that what we've seen over time was how the course augments the existing courses. And so talk to me about to me, that's the people component. You got to sell the university, you got to sell the professors, you got to make sure what the content you've created, is it augmenting the class they're taking? Is it fully in VR? I mean, tell us a little bit about that.
So our approach to solve this problem was that we essentially train the professors to teach their course however they want it. We are not, we don't have to create new curriculum for every course in college because, there's probably 100,000 different pieces of curriculum in higher education across the United States, around the world. So what we have to do is provide the facility. So if you think of the analogy of an existing atom-based building, somebody provides that professor a building, they provide them the chemistry lab, they provide them the whiteboard, whatever they might have, and then the professor teaches whatever they want to teach. That's what we do. We provide them the Metaversity campus. We provide them over thousands and thousands of 3D objects. So no matter what they're teaching, we provide those objects. We provide simulators, all of these things, and that allows them to teach the way they want to teach.
Is it difficult to get the professor on? I mean, it sounds like that's kind of a lift for them to redo their entire course in VR. What's that process like?
So they don't have to redo anything. So let's say that, for example, it's a history course. Let's go back to the example with Professor Hamilton. He would teach about the impact of railroads in Africa. So now he's just teaching the exact same thing, but now they're learning that on a freight train in Africa. When he teaches World War II history about the South Pacific, he's showing videos from World War II. He's doing this and that, but the students are all sitting in chairs on a battleship floating in the South Pacific. So it's not a lot of extra lift on him. That's why we do this professional development training, so they understand that you don't have to do a lot of extra work. You do have to figure some things out, but it's not a real heavy lift.
A question we get sometimes, and this is just across the board, not even just in education, is why VR? Like, why do you need VR if we have high quality simulations? You can even, kids interact with 3D all the time just on a flat screen. What's your answer to that for education when it comes to why VR matters, why it's better?
Yeah, I'm going to address that two different ways. One from the K-12 angle. So in Chicago on the North Shore, if you don't know the North Shore, that's where the money is. Their taxpayers approved a very nice STEM center, $10 million plus. And so the kids on the North Shore, good for them, have access to this really advanced STEM center. But what do we do about the kids on the south side of Chicago? I mean, do we just say, that's the breaks, you're born in the wrong place? This is the way you give them actual access to 3D labs, just like the kids on the North Shore. To say, you can use this on a Chromebook or a PC and just sort of like click and push things around. That's not real learning. Real learning, you have to be able to use your hands. We know this from everything, whether it's from repairing a car to medical surgery. Nobody learns those things just clicking and pushing things on a screen. So the hands-on piece, very important. So that's at the K-12 level. In higher ed, that example also carries through, but also more important in higher ed these days is that 40% of students are taking at least one course online. Oh, and again, how do you learn chemistry in a 2D world? How do you mix beakers and do those sorts of experiments? How do you learn in a cadaver lab in a 2D world? You can't. You can, but it's not nearly as effective as students who get to learn in a 3D world. And, a lot of times we're US centric, but these sorts of facilities and labs are available in some places in the United States, but non-existent in many countries in the world. So as this rolls out, it's a dramatically great paradigm shift in the way that learning is delivered.
That makes sense. So with the Metaversity, you've got a chemistry professor that's now teaching their course in a VR environment. So the students can engage with that remotely, but also there are additional apps that they can engage with to see molecules or whatever. So it brings it both together. That's cool.
And think about something as simple as literature. Sorry to interrupt.
No, go ahead.
Part of the challenge of teaching is you can teach all you want, but if students don't gain understanding, if the scales don't fall from their eyes, then you haven't pushed the ball down the field. And so you think about To Kill a Mockingbird. We rebuilt the courthouse. We will have the author of To Kill a Mockingbird sitting in there as a conversational AI, so students can just ask her about the book.
Wow.
And they can learn what it was like to be considered a second-class citizen and be forced to sit in the balcony or sit below. But suddenly, literature has more meaning because students can experience it. And so that's a big part of our goal with education.
That is very cool. So I have a question about your early days in K-12, because that was an area we tried to push into early on as well. And it wasn't our core focus, but it just felt so challenging before there were standalone devices. Could you just tell us a little bit about, how did you crack into the K through 12 early on and kind of how that's evolved?
Yeah, everything in life is a bell curve. Thank goodness. So, if you think about the world of K-12 schools, you're going to have 2/3 in the first standard deviation. And that's going to be, it's interesting. Someday we'll pursue it. And on the good side, you have that second standard deviation where they're interested and they're trying to figure it out. Then you have that third standard deviation. They got the money, they have the know-how, they just need a vendor and they're going to make it happen. So what we had to do to succeed was to surface those in the third standard deviation, the few bleeding edge people who said, yeah, we'll buy 5 computers and connected headsets, tethered headsets, and then we'll use your dissection and we'll use other products and we will jump into this. And some of it was done with grants, some of it was done with technology budgets, but we found enough to survive. And we did a deal with Microsoft, and that helped as well. And we won a big contest with HTC Vive. So we just kept cobbling it together in the early days.
That's very cool. So you mentioned HTC Vive. Tell us about some of your hardware partnerships today. I know you're working with several of the big players on some initiatives. So maybe share a little bit about that.
Yeah, we're fortunate to have many of the world's largest tech companies as partners. With Meta, they've given us very significant grants to build metaversities around the United States, 30 of them to be exact. With HTC Vive, we are the sole content provider for their school headsets. With Pico, they are active with us distributing our business training bundle, the forklift and fire extinguishers and defibrillator and OSHA warehouse. And then Lenovo, they distribute on their Vive Flow, our global traveler app with 130 global field trips for students. Beyond the device makers, though, we're also fortunate to have Qualcomm and T-Mobile who fund a lot of the R&D. They have an interest in seeing that these devices with chips are out everywhere, and they're accessing 5, 6G. So we work together to try to figure out these issues and how it might deploy in the future. But we're very fortunate.
Let's dive in a little bit to some of the nitty gritty. I mean, you're talking about headsets and different device types, and what do you see are some of the current pain points to going to scale, either in the industry or specifically for schools that you work with?
Yeah. I was on with the school this morning, and they're trying to figure out how do we limit students to just the educational experiences that you provide. And they said, can you do that? And I said, well, it's limited right now. You need to find a partner like ArborXR, or you need to, at some point Meta will, have an enterprise platform that will, at least for their headset, provide more tools for educators. But at the current time, you got to have a management platform like Arbor. So that's a pain point, is helping them figure that out. But it's really not the cost of hardware, because the cost of hardware it's frankly less than a Chromebook. So, I don't think that's it. I think really the big issue is understanding and willingness to try something new. And there are enough friction points that it's a challenge to get people to try something new, because they first have to have understanding of the dramatic impact it can have, but then second, they have to invest the time to figure it out and to stumble through it in the beginning. And people always expect, like, oh, I'm just going to pop on a headset and it's like joining a Zoom meeting. I say, you know what? Remember when you learned to drive, you went through like 6 weeks of learning? Well, this isn't that hard, but you might have to spend 6 hours trying to learn how to maximize the hardware and the software. But it's not 6 minutes.
I want to double click on some of those conversations you've had with schools, as we oftentimes see this with organizations where they get excited, they do a pilot early on, they are just doing kind of everything, hacking things together. It just doesn't matter. They're just trying to see if it works. And at some point it works, they get excited about it, and then they want to start building out and scaling out. And that's where the people, processes, and technology start. The basic things, like how are we going to get Wi-Fi set up on all of these devices? So beyond even, we can talk about device management. Obviously, that's important, something we're interested in. But what are some of the main what other pain points, if you kind of give us a landscape of when you talk to schools and they get excited, and whether it's Morehouse or anybody else, what are the other issues they run into as they start to want to scale things up?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, different schools have different issues. Sometimes it's a bandwidth issue. They will need to segregate off a portion of their bandwidth for VR. Sometimes it's a firewall issue. We run into firewall issues all the time, and that's a lot of times we just say, look, you need device management. Beyond that, sometimes they will have not very many students have problems in VR, but there are some students who do have issues with virtual reality. And so, we had to build our our VictoryXR web platform so that students could access it through Chromebooks, PCs, or MacBooks. So, when you start a new company, like I've done before, you can't always anticipate the roadblocks, the friction points, but you need to have a workable solution at a basic level. And then as you run into these additional problems, you tackle them one by one. You figure out a solution, maybe a couple of solutions, and then you have to commit it to writing or commit it to a video like we do, so that people will understand that if you run into an issue, it's not the end of the road. It's just something you got to drive around.
Something I've noticed with your team and just your progress over the years is that you've managed to come alongside schools and universities and other organizations at an early stage. I mean, you talked about early on, they're plugging headsets in, there's cables, they're wheeling PCs from classroom to classroom. How much of an active role do you have to play even now in terms of really guiding, providing feedback, coaching, etc., even support to some of the schools and universities and other organizations you're working with?
Yeah, it's surprisingly little. For the most part, schools these days, and especially universities, have a whiz kid IT guy, gal who they figure it out, they get it, they probably have a VR headset, and they know their firewalls, and so once we walk them through it, that's the person that gets called, not us. So that's really helpful. But occasionally people have an issue maybe with the way we've developed the content, or maybe they don't have an IT person that can be helpful. So in those cases, we're on standby. We're ready, willing, and able to help. But I've always planned on building a bigger customer support base of employees to resolve these issues, and I'm sort of shocked at how little we actually get called.
That's great. I love that. You find your champion on site, and then they kind of take it from there. You mentioned this briefly, but I know you've got a couple new initiatives that you've either recently launched or are launching. One is the VXR Labs, and then also a new app, a global traveler app. Maybe share a little bit about both of those.
Yeah, VXR Labs is really the most advanced 3D immersive learning platform in the world, and it is for three reasons. One, it's synchronous or asynchronous in nature, which there are other platforms like that, but very important. And second is we now have enabled conversational AI avatars. So what that means, I'll give you an example for a nursing student. A nursing student goes into the emergency room. There's a patient who's complaining of chest pains. And we all know if they're complaining of chest pains, they may not have much time. So the nursing student can have a live, or the doctor student, can have a live two-way conversation with that patient. The patient's answers are not scripted. They're not pre-recorded. It's all driven by conversational AI. So we have put the information into that patient's head, and that patient then replies with, you can ask it, what's your family history? What did you eat this day? What activities did you engage in? All the common questions that would be asked, that information is in their brain. Things you could ask them what their favorite meals are, because that has already been uploaded to give them some personality as well. But also think about, we're just now rolling out Thomas Edison's lab and George Washington Carver's labs. And so you can go in there and touch and feel and learn about the things they invented. But even more than that, you can walk over into the corner where Thomas Edison's sitting there and have a live conversation with Thomas Edison. You can ask him why he invented it, what were the challenges, all of these things, because we have uploaded into their brain everything they ever wrote. So all first-person information, and then a lot of additional information about them and the time period they lived in. So that really changes the learning opportunities with that second component, conversational AI avatars.
Yeah.
And we also have a teacher coming out that way. The third component of that are simulators. Very few platforms, almost none, allow true simulators. So like we've all played Flight Simulator. Mm-hmm. Uploading Flight Simulator onto like AltSpace back in the day, it was not possible. And so we have actual simulators so that nursing student can put an EKG on that patient suffering chest pain and then get a true readout and decide, is this person dying or do they just have indigestion? And that's really the power of it. We've got, a welding machine and a drill, and we have a drone and so many other simulators that are rolling out that just changes the ball game for learning. That's VXR Labs.
I want to ask a follow-up there, if we can, before we move on to the Traveler app. The conversational AI piece, obviously it's a big topic. I've seen a number of simulations or demos on social and LinkedIn where people have tried to do this, and there's challenges around just the lag time and also not having responses go off the wall, or I'm imagining kids asking some question that they takes them into some territory that this teacher would not be happy with. How do you navigate? I mean, you don't have to get too technical, but Do you feel like at this point, is it at the prototype stage, or is it working well and responding quickly and you're happy with it?
Yeah. So, the lag times are an issue that we've worked a lot on. And some of that depends on your internet connection as well, right? But we've gotten the lag times down pretty short. So it's I would say shorter. If you ever ask Google, like say, I got to be careful because if I do this, it'll actually start talking to me. But if you say, hey, Google, you have a bit of a lag time. You say, hey, what's the temperature? What time of day is it? Whatever. You have a little bit of thinking time for Google or Siri or whatever the case might be. Ours seems to be shorter than that. And so there is this moment, and we've actually thought about putting like, people, you and I, we do this as well. We need a second or 2 seconds before we've got our answer formulated. So we go, and then we answer. So we put that filler sound in there. And so we're sort of playing around with that, seeing if we can
that's clever.
make that happen. But our engineers have solved a lot of problems. And so, it's we've rolled it out and rolling it out in a bigger way over the next 4 weeks.
That's awesome. We'll share a link on the show notes for that. I'm sure people will want to check that out. Everybody's thinking about. I have yet to try one that feels like it would be ready for real time, and I would love to get my hands on it. I should have done that before the show, but I will definitely do that after.
You know what? I'll share a YouTube video with you that we haven't made public yet, but make it on your show.
Well, let's go to the Traveler app. I know that's something. Even I think I messaged your team a while back. Like, I want to get on some of these tours. Like, this is. You guys have do you have over 100 travel experiences? Is that right?
130, and adding more all the time. So, here's the thing why this is important. How many students? And again, this is largely an income-based deal, but if you come from a wealthy family, you probably get to travel to Europe and elsewhere. If you are from South Side of Chicago, you probably are not getting out of Illinois very often, or Indiana. So what if we were able to give students the ability to travel the world and expand their horizons? What does that do to the mindset of a student as they think about their future? We have 130 360 VR field trips. They can be deployed to either a 3DOF headset, if you don't know what that is, Google it, or a 6DOF headset. And that matters because now a student can, for example, we just did Luxor, Egypt, where the Valley of the Kings, and we go down into King Tut's tomb. That's pretty cool. And how many of us have gotten to stand in King Tut's tomb? Well, I have for real, but now students all over the world can be down there themselves and see what it's like, and not just like pictures of it or a 2D video. They can look up and see the ceiling. They can look down and see the floor. They can look all around and also learn about King Tut, because we add a lot of other things to it. And I had an Egyptologist help us out with this from the University of Cairo. So we shot 3 field trips, Luxor Temple, Karnak Temple, and the Avenue of the Sphinxes. And I'm just going to take 15 seconds more because this is cool. The Avenue of the Sphinxes is 1,300 sphinxes that line a 3-kilometer path between the Karnak Temple and the Luxor Temple. Nobody knew this existed 70 years ago. It had been buried under sand, and a town had been built on top of it. For, I think it was 3,000 years, it was gone. Wow. And then they discovered it, and they began excavating. They discovered it in 1949, began excavating a little bit in the 70s, and then about 15 years ago, they went all in. And they had to move these stores and homes off the top of it, and they opened up this 3-kilometer walk. And so for the first time in 3,000 years, human beings were able to walk on it in November of 2021. Us living today, we get to walk along this. Now, maybe you're not going to go to Luxor, Egypt. Well, you can walk in our VR version or our 360 field trip version. Either one, pretty cool. I almost get attacked by a dog. We leave that in the video. It's all very reasonable.
Well, that's incredible. I love that. And we also, I guess, found out, the real secret here is that this whole thing is just a shell for you to get to travel to really cool places that nobody else gets to.
Listen, somebody in the company had to do this, so I assigned it to myself.
You suffered. And you're not only getting to go to
I-
places like that, but you're able to be there. I'm guessing they let a film crew. They let you film in areas that most tourists don't ever get to go to, or at least don't
Yeah.
get to go to and be the only person there.
I've been, we frequently have other people around just because we don't have time to always schedule,
Yeah.
these sorts of trips, and we have limited budgets. But I've been to places in locations that to be able to travel there, even if it's in a VR headset, is still pretty cool.
Well, if you ever need any device management along the way, I'd be happy to come along and assist with you.
I do have
So
a long
we'll
list
give you
of-
the Arbor white glove experience.
Love
This has been really, really good. Super insightful. Maybe as we move towards a wrap here, I'd love to hear, where you see this all going over the next, 5, 10, 15 years. What does education look like as VR matures?
Yeah. So I am 100% convinced that every college and university in the world will have immersive 3D learning, whether it's AR, VR, mixed reality, whatever it's going to be, at one level or another. Some will be going all in. There will be Metaversity colleges and universities, and some will just, use it for a particular lab or maybe use the time machine, right? So that will happen over the next 5 years in higher education. And so we're working hard to be ready to satisfy that demand. In K-12, I think around the world, we'll see half of middle schools and high schools employing some sort of immersive 3D learning. And, that's a pretty sharp demand curve. And so there are a lot of VR companies out there, as you guys know, more than anybody else. And so there are people that are ready to fill it. We have our approach, others have their approach, but the bottom line is it's going to be a pretty significant increase.
Yeah, it's exciting. And you think about even just basic, lab functionality for a high school. The high school I went to, small town, we didn't really have a lab. And so you can see that you don't, maybe your whole course is in VR, but some of the augmentation would be super, super valuable. Well, Steve, I know you're busy. You've started 4 companies. You're focused on this one now, but we really appreciate you taking the time to sit down with us and kind of share some of your insights. So thanks for joining us today.
Well, I love working with ArborXR, so I appreciate you having me on.
Thanks, Steve.
Absolutely. Well, that was a lot of fun. We talk a lot about the learning revolution. We get to sit down with a lot of these enterprise companies, and it was neat to get to hear from someone who's on the front lines with traditional education. And you think about just how big that world is and how much potential there is for VR to grow and really be transformative. And I love the accessibility piece. I think that's one thing we often don't hit on when we talk about the learning revolution.
I agree. And something stuck out to me as he was talking, just this sense that, man, Victory has been on this journey with us. We've been alongside them 6 years now. I know that some listening have been doing VR for longer, but for us, that feels like an eternity. And it does feel at some point that we all have just survived the twists and turns and the ups and downs, and the water is rising, but slowly. And I just think about, man, if we can just hang on there a little bit longer, it does feel like a transformative technology that is making a real impact. And I loved how he kept bringing it back to the impact on the individual students and the ways that it transforms their learning experience, or opens up learning experiences that they don't have an opportunity to have otherwise. Whether that's a cadaver training or being able to sit down in a fully immersive chemistry lab and blow stuff up or whatever. So to me, they have, I don't want to say they're a survivor. If they're a survivor, we're a survivor, but they've managed to hang on there through the ups and downs and making a huge impact, and excited to see what they come up with over the next few years.
Yeah, we're definitely survivors. But I do like how he positioned it. You got to show up and you have to persist. And if you do that, then you get to blow up stuff in a chemistry lab in VR, which is
and whether you're in a company right now trying to build an XR program, or whether you're in a startup and you're just now getting going, I think now is a great time to be in VR. But also just that awareness that it may take a while still. This is a very different technology. It's not like just going from a PC to a tablet, that's still a flat screen. You're still using, maybe arguably you're going from a keyboard and mouse to touching a screen, but an immersive environment with a totally different language and way of interacting with that world, it's a stretch for a lot of people. So it's going to take time.
That's a really good point, and I think it is something for anyone who's just getting started or on the front edge of deploying XR in their organization. The mindset is super helpful. The right mindset, and having a mindset that it's going to take some time. And I think one thing that's come up again and again on these interviews is that it's not necessarily the technology that's the friction point. It's the people part. It's selling people on a new idea. It's showing the benefits of a new idea. And I think that's something that we all have gotten, like he said, he thought, 2016 it was going to go. So did we. We get excited about this new technology and just assume, oh, it's a no-brainer. But there's a people component, and that's life. So I think starting with the right mindset is very, very helpful. Well, thank you as always for joining us. We appreciate you spending a little time with us. Make sure you check us out wherever you listen to or watch your podcast, and we will catch you next time.